Welcome to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. Welcome back to the Means of Grace podcast. I'm Jesse Enniss, the Director of Communications for the Leadership Development Team.
And I'm Kim Ingram, the Director of Ministerial Services for the annual conference. And we are excited about our conversation today. We are going to talk about artificial intelligence, or AI, as it relates to ministry, as it relates to church leadership, and as it relates to our personal lives. AI refers to the simulation of human intelligence in machines or computer systems that are programmed to perform tasks that typically require human intelligence. Okay, now stay with us here. That's the definition of what AI is, but we're going to get a whole lot more user-friendly in a minute. So just wanted to be sure everybody's kind of on the same page. The purpose of AI, or the goal, is to create systems that can learn, reason, problem solve, understand natural language, and perceive the environment. So it seems to me like AI can do a lot for us in our lazy days, in our tired days, or in our I have no creative thinking ideas days. So we're going to learn what that looks like. Our conversation will focus on natural language processors, computer vision, and especially things that we have heard of like Alexa, Chat GPT, and Ideogram.
Our guests today are Nathan Webb, pastor of Checkpoint Church, the church for all people, especially nerds, geeks, and gamers. And Amy Rutledge Vaughan is a deacon in the Western North Carolina Conference UMC Collective, leading an emerging community called the Lakeshore Collective in Lincoln and Catawba Counties. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, great to be here.
So we're excited to talk to you about kind of your use of AI and how you have utilized it both in your lives and in your ministry. So let's just start with kind of the basics of what interested you in AI. What sparked your interest, Nathan? How did it come on your radar?
Sure. So without going too deep into the weeds of Checkpoint and a church for nerds, that naturally kind of turns itself into a digital community. And so we're a digital first church plant. And so everything that we do is first and foremost online. And so that just kind of took off. AI tends to be online. We tend to be online. And so the two things just kind of naturally work together. Whenever I knew it was really necessary was because we are a new church plant. We don't necessarily have the funds available for staffing. And so I was looking for help. And AI was there to say, hey, I can ease some of the workload and some of the more monotonous tasks and make those a bit easier.
Well, so that's something we'll want to dig deeper into, because a lot of our listeners, especially some of our clergy leaders, don't have staff. And we're always looking for ways to make our lives a little bit easier. So we're going to learn a little bit more for what that means and how you've utilized that. Amy, I don't think you'll be offended by this. You and I are more of the same generation. And perhaps AI hasn't come on our radar quite as quickly as it comes on other people's radar. And I'm making assumptions here that are not fair, so forgive me for that. But tell us what caught your attention about that?
Well, you are not making too many assumptions. We are of the same generation. I happen to have a spouse who is an IT person, and so I'm a little bit more in tune with things, I think, than regular folks sometimes. He laughs sometimes. I'm the IT person in a group, and I'm not really an IT person, but I look for the functionality of things. And actually, some of what we both started looking at, he's my only layperson that I entered this appointment with, and so I depended on him to help me. And we both were aware of what Jason Moore was beginning to share. And my husband does some graphics for when we post things on YouTube, like sermons, that he'll add some graphics in. And he started using some of those sermon inserts, and I started using it in other ways too, just to help me, like what you said in your introduction, be creative or to do things a little bit more efficiently, and saw that it was pretty interesting to experiment with it. So it made me want to try other things with it as well.
So we heard the big, lofty dictionary definition of what these AI tools are. Nathan, can you explain to us, based on kind of the current state of these AI tools, can you explain to someone with a limited knowledge of these tools what they are and what they do for you.
There's a myriad of tools out there, and the ways that they work are also plenty. There's lots of different ways that you can utilize these platforms and these tools and these things that people are creating. But ultimately, what it comes down to is that these are tools that are built to receive information, to interpret information, and to spit back out information. So at the end of the day, what we're looking at is a lot of different code and mumbo jumbo that a lot of us don't understand. But at the end of it all, it's something that takes in information, internalizes it, and puts it back out there. And so whether you're dealing with a GPT or a voice assistant or whatever we've been using for a while on our phones, whether it be Alexa or Siri or any of those, it's just what it's always been. It's something that is using code and using advanced technology and internal processing to then take that information and turn it into something else entirely.
Okay, so here's my question about that. What makes it different from a web browser search? Because that seems to me like you're searching for information. I know it is different, but what makes it different? Like, let's get to the granular, like help somebody like me understand.
Sure. Well, there are some search engines that have it built in, right? I mean, you think about Bing and Microsoft Edge, they built in their own AI into the search process. And so there's certainly elements that make search engines well, but it's just like that. It's something that can blend with, not something that's in place of. So the way that it's searching out information is different in the sense that it's actually processing it rather than just reading the words that you're typing into a search bar. It's actually considering and adapting based off of the information that you're giving it. So it already has a process built into it that it's then interpreting data rather than just processing your input.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So the public perception of AI, and Amy, I wonder what you think about this. It's not always positive. What is your sense of how we might regard AI in maybe a positive way, or do you think that the negative connotations are fair?
Well, I think it's like lots of things, technologically new things. A lot of people have a hard time adapting to that initially. I mean, even to when the printed word first appeared, and in more recent terms, television was an innovation. And it seems like every new iteration of something, there's some skepticism. And maybe some of it is founded as things are kind of explored and developed. And, there's a lot of talk about, AI being a threat to our way of life, but it is, at the end of the day, it's just a tool, and we can learn how to use it effectively. And I think it behooves us to do that we should be doing that. If that's a resource that we have, to share the good news, which is what we in the church are all about, then it would be bad stewardship not to use that resource.
Amy, I guess I could say of the generation that is more prone to using newer technologies, but even still, when things like ChatGPT and ideogram started to surface and creating lifelike images of the Pope, for instance, that fool a lot of people. Even I became a little bit skeptical, a little bit worried about what this would mean for creators and things like that. And then I kind of realized that I have been using a lot of AI tools already. Like, I already have Siri on my iPhone. I have an Alexa that I use at home. I've been using Grammarly, which is a software that kind of checks your grammar and your spelling and reads all of my seminary papers before I turn them in. And so I'm recognizing that a lot of these AI tools are things that I've used already that have been super useful and time saving. Amy, are there any specific tools that you use a lot that you would recommend? What are the tools that you're using these days?
Well, I have been using ChatGPT a lot, but in addition, with the help of my a little bit more savvy, technologically knowledgeable husband, we've been using Adobe Firefly and then Adobe Express, and that just is helping us to create thumbnails for our YouTube videos. And those are the most useful things. My husband also used something to, he used that to help create video for the pilgrimage that our district took to the African American Museum in Charleston. He was looking for something that sounded like it could have been Frederick Douglass, and he used AI to generate that as well. So it helps with both words and visuals and vocal help to find voices. And that has worked pretty well for us so far. There is much, much more to explore, but that's just scratching the surface for us, I think.
So let's take a minute and just talk about GPT, Chat GPT. So I didn't even realize all this stuff was AI, but that's a new one for me that I've used like 3 times. I'm really fortunate that I work with somebody next door, Megan, and she uses Grammarly that you mentioned and Chat GPT, and she's begun to show me, and really it does help to have somebody, if you can connect with somebody that's familiar with these things, it provides a helpful introduction into them. Okay, so Nathan, Chat GPT, you can put something in it. So for example, I used it to come up with a name of an event we were hosting. So we put all the details of the event into Chat GPT and said, what are some possible names we could call this event? And it produced some ideas that we were able to go with for one of those. What are some other ways? Well, first off, how do people get to Chat GPT, and what are some other ways it could be useful?
Sure. So ChatGPT is produced through OpenAI. So by searching, either going to open.ai, the website, or by searching it on your browser preference, you'll be able to find it and access it. There is a free version and then an upcharge, but I'll tell you, I'd recommend the upcharge if you have the funding around, because it is impressive. What the newest model can typically do. So OpenAI is pretty innovative and is very future thinking in the way that they're developing. So the newest and latest and greatest is pretty cool to play around with. But if you're just looking to poke around, there is a free version so you can play with it right now. The newest thing that they did that I've been utilizing it for is that I got tired. I was using it for most of my projects to kind of be a creative partner and a collaborator. And I got kind of tired of always having to start over. And so what you have to do whenever you start a conversation with a GPT is you really want to start a new chat every time, because the more that you use the same conversation, the more it's going to draw in all the information you fed it from prior. And what that leads to is what's called in the AI world hallucinations. So it will start coming up. Let's say that you used the thread that you used to brainstorm some names, and then you change it to a completely different conversation and you ask it for something. It might get confused and start saying, might start bringing back up that event from the very beginning. So it might say, oh, whenever you're planning this thing and you're like, what do you mean? We did that months ago. It's going to get confused with all the information that it's being fed. And so you had to start the conversation over so routinely that I was like getting tired of giving it the prompt. And there are people out there working on prompts pretty regularly. But with this latest update, they have given you the ability now to create your own GPT. So you're actually able to create a personality, a background, and a command set. So all you have to do is click on Generate New ABC GPT and let this one do its specific task. So the way that I'm doing it is we have a weekly news show that we talk about nerdy news from a Wesleyan perspective. And the way that we provide the information is I feed it an article, it interprets that article, and gets it very much shorter so that I can give a blurb and then react to it without having to read the article, interpret it, come up with a summary, and do all that work. Instead, I get to just kind of read what it comes up with and then provide my own commentary on that. And so now I have a robot that I can click on, Twig GPT, and every time I click on that, it's going to start with the presumption that I'm about to feed it an article on some nerdy news. And it's already all pre-built. I don't have to give it a prompt every time. All I got to do is click a button, feed it the information, and it gives me exactly what I want. And so that is an impressive thing that you can build. I saw one of my fellow UMC pastors came up with a sermon GPT that you can just feed it a piece of scripture and it'll start giving you some sermon notes or some commentary, collaborations, merging them all together and responding to that. So there's a lot of really impressive stuff that you can build now within ChatGPT if you have that paid subscription.
Nathan, it sounds like you trust ChatGPT a lot more than I do. My fear is always, so for instance, I've done that a little bit for school. Let's say there's an article that we need to read that we're going to have a discussion on for school. My fear is that that it won't get it exactly right. And then I will show up in class, start having a conversation, and everyone will look at me like, what did he read? Because this is not this is not the chapter that we discussed. Tell me how you got to that place where you mentioned a friend of yours too who's used it for sermon notes. How do you get to that? Is it just like, is it what you've seen from others? Is it what you've done on your own with ChatGPT? Is it a combination? How have you gotten to that place?
I think there's a level of discernment and also professionalism that has to kind of be taken into account with the thing. And so if I'm doing scholastic work, I'm probably not going to trust it to summarize. I'm not going to trust it to write for me. I do a lot of copywriting and a lot of work in writing, and I'm never going to send the first pass to GPT and then use that as my draft. I might send it an outline and ask for feedback on the outline, and then I get to work and then I'll feed it what I've written to catch any errors or give feedback. But at the end of the day, what I trust GPT to be is an information interpreter. And so as long as I'm the one feeding it the information, then that's where I kind of come into this level of trust. And so I'm not going to necessarily ask it to, for instance, I wouldn't just type into GPT and say, what would John Wesley say about fill in the blank? Instead, I would feed it an article from umc.org and I would say, based off of this article, what might you interpret? And then just kind of read what it says and know the information that I know and see if those two things mesh. I'm probably, again, not going to present that in a dissertation, but that's still going to be a way that I'm going to know the information it's drawing from instead of just trusting it to search the entire database that it's got built into its system. So I think it's less of a means of trust and more of a means of knowing its limits and also knowing how it gets the information back to you. And then feeding it what it might need. But I definitely think that I'm definitely nervous a lot of the time about it doing anything scholastic with it or anything professional with it. But on a means of purely just information base or interpretations, I found that it does a pretty good job.
So let's talk about sermons for a minute. A lot of people that listen to this podcast may be sermon writers on a regular basis. Amy, I heard you reference earlier something about sermons and AI. What is the usefulness, and then what is kind of the ethical kind of guidelines for AI? And if you'll say kind of specifically what tool in preparing to preach or writing sermons?
Well, I most often use ChatGPT if I'm asking for some help with the sermon, and I may enter the scripture and I may say interpret the scripture from a progressive Christian point of view, or to narrow it a little bit. But I kind of look at it as like I have a college intern at my disposal, and I do fact check and I read through and make sure that the theology is sound and in line with what I would say. And I've never ever used just exactly what it has spit out verbatim, because it lacks my voice and it lacks maybe the focus that I want to have. But I used it. It's sort of like having an outline when you're writing something. And I use it to help organize my thoughts more than anything else, and perhaps send me to some resources that I might not have thought about, or an idea that I might not have thought about, and then I can explore that based on what it's written. So I use it in that sort of way as an assistant that is fairly reliable, but still I check behind it to make sure that it's in line with what I want to say, what I think I should be saying, what the Holy Spirit is saying, as well as what ChatGPT is saying, really.
Nathan, what are your thoughts about sermon writing and AI?
Yeah, well, so what I always think about is what we lack and what we don't have in the environments that we have, whether it's because of funding or staffing or just our environment or the fact that we're serving a rural church that is doing the best they can, and you're just trying to make ends meet. Whatever the scenario might be, I think about what we aren't able to have. And how can AI fill that void or give us a leg up? And so then I think about these mega churches that have teams that sit down around a boardroom table and they write out the sermon from week to week, and they come up with the exact sermon beats and notes, and the worship team's going to come up here and do this song here and why, and it's going to work into this thing here and there. And that is something that we just simply cannot do. But with AI, we might be able to get closer. And so I see it as a collaborator and as a thing that is going to allow my sermons to hopefully be more full by entering into conversation. Ideally, we're doing this work anyway with friends and with peers and with pastoral cohorts. And so it should just be another conversation starter, another think piece, like Amy was saying, another thing that's going to allow us to probe deeper and be more thorough, not less thorough. And so as a means of ethics, I think it shouldn't be a crutch as much as a deeper pool that we might be able to dive into and explore more options with the time that we simply don't have. And as long as it's still providing citations and still providing information, which they're continually improving on, I see it as just a deeper collaborative tool above everything else.
So a couple of things that we've mentioned, like, AI is a kind of like a collaborative partner. AI can be used kind of like an intern. But my concern when I hear that is that for some of us that don't have these folks at our disposal, this is a great help. But what my concern is that there could potentially be down the line spaces where folks would choose to, pay for the premium version, I guess, of ChatGPT, as opposed to actually having an intern with them. And for me, I think that kind of raises a little bit of an ethical concern. There are some other ethical considerations for the widespread use of AI that need to be considered. For example, like it could inadvertently inherit and perpetuate biases that's present in the data that we share, that we feed into it. There's a lack of transparency on how AI systems make decisions, the collection and analysis of that data that we're feeding into it. And like I said, the potential to replace certain jobs, and there's also security risks involved with vulnerable AI systems. So my question is, as the folks in the church, as pastors, as lay leaders, how can we protect our congregations from some of these ethical concerns? Nathan?
I do want to say I'm so thankful that you brought up what I think is my biggest ethical concern, because I think that very often we touch on the ethics of the thing and just kind of we treat AI like a boogeyman. But what I really do think it is that it's something that could very dangerously exacerbate the loneliness. And I'm so concerned about that. As a creative person, I fear GPT taking away my creativity. I don't fear it writing for me or doing anything like that. I think we're still going to have creative people. But what I do fear is that you're no longer going to go to your friends and ask for their advice, or go to peers and ask for their feedback, or go to the creative person that you know that's creative in a different way than you are and ask them for some help, some assistance. I'm worried that is going to be what we ultimately diminish. And so I think that, just like with just about anything in ministry or in the professional life, making sure that you have a healthy routine of self-care is going to be essential, and it's just going to take different turns. So now we have to pay attention to, am I over-relying? Am I overusing? Am I focusing too much? Is AI the first option that pops in my head every single time? And kind of doing those self-checks along the way is going to be somewhat necessary in figuring things out as you go forward. So I think on the lay end, being not incredibly overbearing by any means, but just including that in your considerations when paying attention to what your pastor does, and looking at sermons and thinking about, man, they've used AI as their key example 4 weeks in a row now. That's a little interesting. I think, without, I don't want to overbear by any means, but I think as a means of self-care, asking ourselves, is it really our only option? Is it the tool that we're using more than all the others? Why is that? And then being aware of it might be a positive step forward. I think we're still figuring it out. And it's still so amorphous and volatile that it's like, I don't know that I have the magic answer, except for keep your eyes open and pay attention, because I think that this thing is moving fast. Here's a good one. Sam Altman, this is time dating us a little bit, but recently, before Thanksgiving, Sam Altman was fired from OpenAI, hired by Microsoft, and then rehired by OpenAI after their entire staff threatened to quit. That was the course of 72 hours. If you were calm during that, you're probably not addicted to AI. You're okay. But if that happened and you went into panic mode of like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to get the work done that I have because I'm so reliant on ChatGPT, that might be a time for some self-reflection and say, maybe I am a little too reliant on this thing. At the end of the day, it needs to be a tool. And if that tool disappears, we still need to be able to get the work done that we've been getting done.
So let's talk practical. Let's talk practical for just a minute, a little bit more. So is there anything in your kind of daily life, regular life, maybe not even professional life, that you're using AI for? Just kind of give people an idea of maybe how they're already utilizing it and don't realize it, or what would be a kind of a hack that it could provide that would just be a practical, helpful, easy to access kind of thing. Amy, do you have a thought?
Well, I do. And, one of the things, Kim, you mentioned you used ChatGPT to come up with a name for events. That's actually how I came up with the name for the Lakeshore Collective. But going back to what Nathan was saying, it's a matter of balance for me, because I took that list that it generated and I ran it by some actual humans and of various ages and descriptions and backgrounds before we settled on that particular name. The same thing with an event we just planned. I used it for that as well. I'm starting to use it. I do a weekly email. I'm starting to use it to help me take some fairly mundane information about schedules and what's going on to try to jazz it up a little bit, to make it a little bit more interesting. And I can see doing that. And for on the weekends when we're creating, especially our weekly things for social media, I'm finding it useful for that, and going to that as a way to help as well. And I think kind of, again, echoing what Nathan said, it's a matter of balance for me in using this thing in my day-to-day life. Like, I still believe in some of the ancient practices of spirituality and getting ready to write, silence and studying the scripture and those kind of things that are totally non-technical, but the use of the technical, the ChatGPT, is just a part of that, and it's a balance. And I'm finding more and more ways that I can use it in especially the routine and repetitive tasks that I find myself doing. I think it's especially useful for that.
So then it really is a time saver for things that are not sometimes all that creative, but have to get done. And it sounds like helps you be more creative sometimes. So I need to send an email to all clergy this week. So maybe I'll put it together and then I'll put it in ChatGPT and say, make me sound funny or something. And we'll see how that plays out. I don't know. Y'all will get this email later. We'll see what it looks like. Nathan, what about you? How do you use it on a regular basis?
Yeah, I was going to say, so I definitely use it both personally and then also professionally in a lot of different ways daily. I would say that as someone with some pretty crippling social anxiety, there are times where I would stare at an email and just be like, I need to respond to this email. I need to respond to this email, but I don't have the social bandwidth right now. And so I would find myself in this kind of social fatigue of not doing a thing that I know needed to be done, but I would put it off because of something that I couldn't control. And so having a GPT already built in to my Gmail and just being able to open that email and come up with a generic response based off of AI is something that has made my anxiety lessen. So that's something that is very practical and very real in my daily life. Grammarly has already been brought up several times. That's a huge one that I have plugged in everywhere. It helps me maintain a sense of the conversational dynamic that I want to. It helps me pay attention to the voice that I use. But professionally, some things that I don't know how I would live without at this point, which is, again, a question we've got to ask ourselves. But something that has really made the process easier and made time saving pretty huge are they're video editing devices. And so there's one called Opus Clip. There's plenty of these out there, but Sermon Shots is probably the biggest example that most churches are going to know and be familiar with, where you can feed in your sermon or a video that you've created, and it'll draw out highlights for you and put captions on there for you and do all of that so that you don't have to do the work of clipping up these random monotonous bits, but instead it will find them. You can review them, see what's good, see what's bad, and choose what to use. So that's huge. And then Descript is a platform that I use on a very much regular basis. It takes your videos and it turns them into a Word document that you can then edit. And it edits the video just like you would a Word document. So you can delete out, you can command, find all uhs and delete out all the uhs in one click of a button. And like, that is something that, could I do it myself? I certainly could. But if I'm going to save the time and be able to do it all in one magic button click, that's pretty game changing and huge, and allows me to focus more of my time and energy on the actual interpersonal ministry that I would prefer doing. So it's tools like that. And it's ways that it saves time that I think are the most valuable.
I would say, from a personal perspective, we haven't talked a lot about like assistants like Alexa and Siri or Google Home, but I use all of them. And my kids even use them. Typically, more or less, I use them to like set timers and that type of thing, but my kids like to use them to tell Spotify what to play. And so I very often, since we share the same Spotify account, I very often get in my car and hear the Lollipop song or something or Gummy Bear song or something like that. But that, I think, coupled with, being able to make lists and things like that, like Alexa, add this to the grocery list so that, we don't have to sit around and make that list later on. Those are the types of things that I've used them for, that I encourage people to use them for. But of course, they just kind of typically give us more time to do the fun things that we want to do, the important things that we want to do. And so I really appreciate that as well. My question for the future is, how do you see these trends? How do you foresee the future development and integration of these AI technologies? Or have you even thought about that, Amy?
Well, I think we've touched a little bit on replying to email and to text communication, that there's room for growth there, and maybe some non-ministry things like use in self-driving cars. I think those are some areas where AI might be useful, both, ministry wise and just in general life. And, Jesse, when you were talking about how you're using in your personal life, I've used it when I've got some pantry or refrigerator ingredients, and I'll say, hey, come up with a recipe using these things, which you get a little different results from ChatGPT than you do Google or Bing or any of the other searches. So I found that to be kind of a useful way in for something very practical. And I think those kinds of things might grow in general use, and people might come to use them frequently, and just to be another resource.
Nathan, how about you? How do you see the future development and integration of these technologies?
Yeah, it's moving so fast. I'm terrified. I think that there is a like level of respect that we have to have for AI, of like fearful respect of where we're going and where we're headed. I am convinced that I think that things are moving so quickly, creativity is moving so quickly, and the ability to do things is moving so quickly, that what we're really going to have to do as ministry leaders going forward is wrestle and deal with the choice fatigue that's going to be ahead of us. It really is kind of a world is your oyster moment right now, where if you can dream it, you can do it with AI. And so if you want to go out and develop this thing, or if you want to go and use this one platform, like, you can, and you can make it work for you. And you can start a TikTok channel, tomorrow, and feed all your videos into Opus Clip, and you can have videos for years from all of the sermons that you've got posted online by this point. So it's really just a matter of knowing what do you want, why do you want it, and why do you think it's going to serve the building of the kingdom and going forward and doing ministry. And so I think that is the toughest part for me, is that there are so many options, and there only seem to be more launching with each new day. And so it's going to take a lot of discernment to know what should I do next, because I can do anything, and which one is the most important for doing the hard work of ministry that I discern to be the most important for transformation.
So if you could hope for anything, I know this, like you said, is kind of like it's exploding, and we really don't have any control over it. But if you did have control over it, what would be your hopes for the relationship between the church and AI in the future?
With digital ministry in particular, one of the things that I think AI is the most truly like useful for is moderation and keeping the communities safe. And so I know that cybersecurity has been a concern that we've mentioned, and that's certainly true, but the actual moderation of communities, watching for words, watching for aggression, watching for these kind of things, I integrate these in all of my digital communities. I utilize these constantly. And we have volunteers that are real people moderating, but being able to have a tool that can then moderate as well is huge for having a community that is by default 24/7. And so I'm hopeful that with the future of AI, we're able to have some form of security that I truly feel comfortable with, that our space is truly safe 24/7 for all the people that we have, so that I can let that concern be a little bit easier, more protection of our vulnerable adults and of our youth online, utilizing that to make the internet by and large, which is kind of the Wild West, into a more protected place.
What about you, Amy? What are your hopes for the relationship between the church and AI in the future?
Well, I think that we have a responsibility to teach people to use AI responsibly and to understand its limitations. I used to be an English teacher, and I used to teach a unit every year on understanding advertising and the biases in advertising. And I think this is similar in what we need to do to help people to be good consumers of this, and to view it with a little bit of healthy skepticism, and to not use it as their only source of information, but to use it responsibly, just like you teach people to look at advertisements and try to figure out where the bias is. You touched a little bit earlier on bias, and I think we need to be aware of that and make sure that those in our sphere of influence are being aware and doing a little self-checking when they're using AI on a regular basis, as we all are in already, without really thinking about it too much. Just awareness.
Yeah, so I appreciate that you all have really given us some tools, some ideas, some practical uses of AI. And it helps, I think, for kind of newbies like me to realize we already use it in regular ways in our lives, and just didn't know it was, or I didn't know it was in the category of AI. So it makes it a little less threatening when you know, okay, I already know how to use Siri. So there's a first start. So I think that's been really helpful. I also appreciate that, you have said nothing replaces listening to the voice of the Holy Spirit. Nothing replaces community and being in community and collaborating with human beings around creative things and around the really deep and personal things in our lives. So there is a use and a place and a time for AI, and it may help us to do our work better and even in more creative and reach new people, but we're still the church living out the hands and feet of Christ in our communities, and just want to really be sure we continue to say, that's who we are, that's what we're about. And the rest of the stuff just helps us to do that in some significant ways sometimes. And we will continue to resource this. So we'll put in the show notes. We did an e-lead on AI, which gave some different kinds of resources around where you can learn more about AI. I feel like that there are people who are going to just want more information. And so Nathan and Amy, there may be people that reach out to you directly, but we'll try to continue to think about, how can we specifically resource a particular idea? So if the listeners have an idea of what they'd like to learn more about or become, more clear on, let us know so we can figure out how to resource that better. And also congregational development is doing some of this work. Amy, you mentioned Jason Moore, and I know he's been a partner with the Office of Congregational Development early on in the hybrid stuff, but now moving more into AI and other kind of digital technical kinds of resourcing. So continue to pay attention to the conference e-news and other things that come out of the conference on how your church and your ministry can be resourced in some of these ways.
As a person who I was raised by my great grandmother, and I've spent a lot of time in church, and so I've spent a lot of time with folks who are of an older generation than I'm in, and spent a lot of time kind of helping them with things that I consider to be very basic. I hope that these tools can be used to help some of the folks who need a little bit more help in certain things, in certain day-to-day activities. And I'm hoping that we can just use them as tools, right? Tools that can give us more time to spend with one another, tools that can help us to do the one thing that these AI and all these other emerging technologies can't do, which is being human. I believe that we are all blessed and gifted to be a part of the body of Christ, to be a part of one another. And so I just hope that these tools can help us to get rid of some of the monotonous things that we have to do in this life so that we can spend more time being human. And just remember to do no harm, to do good, and to stay in love with God in the process. Thank you, Nathan. Thank you, Amy, for your time today. Thank you so much for sharing with us all the great ways that you use ChatGPT. You have inspired me, someone who is already using these tools to do more. And as Kim has mentioned, you've also kind of helped her to ground a lot of this information in the work that she's doing, and help some of us to realize that we are already using some of these technologies. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing in your ministry, and for the ways that you've enlightened us today.
Thank you for listening to Means of Grace, a podcast produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church. We hope you enjoy listening to these podcasts and use them as a way to stay connected to our community. Remember to subscribe to Means of Grace for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please leave us an honest rating and a review. It helps others find this podcast. Follow the WNCC on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at WNCCUMC. Once again, that's at WNCCUMC. Means of Grace is produced by the Western North Carolina Conference of the United Methodist Church and Andy Go of Gojo Studios.